So I know it's been a while since I made my last video for the channel. I wasn't intending to leave it that way, but my semester got very intense and I did have some more health issues that got in the way. So today's video, I'm going to start from basically the beginning of my health journey. The first thing that started going wrong, before all this, I was training for a marathon. I was in pretty perfect health for my age. But in October 2014, um, in the middle of training for the marathon, I was going to do it in the fall, I started to notice that I, I had a cough, and I thought maybe I had just had a mild cold, but the cough didn't go away. I had it for a couple months, and by December, I went to the doctor. Basically, she told me she didn't know, and she didn't really care. By the way, that's the first sign of a doctor that you don't want to see anymore, is they're like, I don't know what's going on, so get out of here. Um, Believe it or not, there's a lot of doctors like that. I've seen a lot of them. But as spring came on, it still wasn't going away. Um, Another doctor decided I had croup, which my cough does tend to sound pretty croupy from time to time, but it just didn't make sense. So I went to another doctor, my doctor that I still see from time to time. She's up in Maryland, and I'm going to school in North Carolina, so most of the time I just go to student health here, but she's still my primary care. So she actually listened to what I was saying and was like, that's not right. We've got to figure out what that is so we can take care of it, or at least try. So she referred me to a pulmonologist who is, basically a lung doctor. Um, and he decided that I had asthma, which is weird because I was 24. And usually when you hear about people with asthma, it's, oh, I've had it since I was a kid and it got better when I grew up. I never had it as a kid. So just so everyone knows, you can get asthma as an adult even when you never had any symptoms before. So I was relieved. That was in April. So I finally knew what was going on. He started me on just Singular, I think. Maybe he started me on an inhaler, but it wasn't a standard asthma inhaler, which we'll get to that. But I think it was Arnuity that he started me on, which is a weird thing to start someone on with asthma when you've never tried anything before. So first of all, if you're getting diagnosed with a chronic illness, look up the standard treatments, because some doctors, as I found out, will use you as a guinea pig and just try things that they think are new and fun, instead of just trying the standard treatments first to see if they work. You always want to be sure that you're starting in the right spot. Start with the standards, and if the standards don't work, then do something new and interesting. So that was in April. June, the inhaler that he had put me on, I started reacting badly to for some reason. Either that or I was just getting worse. So late June, I actually had my first severe attack and I ended up in the hospital. And that was terrifying, by the way. If you've never had asthma before, you're just starting to get used to the fact that you have these breathing symptoms, and then all of a sudden you can't breathe at all. So my boss, who, by the way, is one of the best people on the planet, I no longer work for him, but I worked for him for 6 years, and actually he got YouTube famous in July 2016 because I'm from Ellicott City, Maryland, and there was the huge flood that knocked out the old part of the town. And he actually got on worldwide news because he formed a human chain and saved a woman from the flood. So, by the way, he also saved my life by taking me to the hospital because he knew what was going on and I really didn't. So anyway, I got that taken care of, but then I just kept having an attack every time I went back to work. It was the historical part of town, and it was a really old building, so I think something there was irritating me. And I'd never had asthma before, so I didn't know that was a trigger. So I ended up having to leave that job just because I couldn't breathe there. Even when I go back now, I can only stay for a short time. It is what it is. if you do have a chronic illness, you'll find that things that you used to do, you can't anymore, and it's really frustrating, but you just got to deal with it. It's better to be alive and not do those things than just try to do them and end up in the hospital a lot. So, I mean, at that point, I was having an attack every few weeks, and by the time I ended up leaving that job, it started to get a little better. I ended up getting a job at a bank as a teller, and then that same semester I started law school. So things started going okay, but that whole semester I was still having a lot of trouble breathing at school because I was going to school in Baltimore, and Baltimore has really terrible air. There's a super high incidence of asthma, which I only learned about it after I started researching, but they have a lot of pollution, and it's just, I ended up having to wear a mask whenever I was in the city, one of those masks like people in Asia wear when it's cold and flu season. Um, so that was a little weird because everyone was like, "Are you dying? Are you contagious? Do you have a plague?" No, I just can't breathe, and this helps because it filters out some of the irritants. And I ended up having to carry around a nebulizer everywhere because it was just that bad. I was having to use the nebulizer before, during, after class, and then eventually I even started having attacks at my job at the bank, and it got to the point where money was becoming an irritant. You don't think about this, but money touches a lot of things. It's in a lot of disgusting places. And coming from someone who works at a bank, people will take the most disgusting money to the bank because they don't want to deal with it. We once had a woman who brought us a bag of dog poop. Her dog had swallowed money and she wanted to change that money in for better money. I guess they just don't care about the health of tellers, but please don't do that. That's disgusting. We won't take it. They won't take it. I don't work there anymore. But that was a big digression. But anyway, it got to the point, eventually, I just kept getting worse. I ended up getting a new pulmonologist after I found out that what my original pulmonologist was doing was not the standard treatment, and I was not getting better. I was getting worse. So I went to Johns Hopkins, and the pulmonologist there did do a little better. He actually put me on standard asthma treatments, which did help a little bit, but Maryland just has really bad air, and it got to the point where I was in the hospital at least once a month, usually twice, sometimes even more than that, every month. And in the last spring, so about a year ago, I was in the hospital for a week with pneumonia, secondary to asthma, because people with asthma are at high risk for pneumonia. And the doctor there was like, it's the air around here, and you're severe. I have the most severe kind of asthma out of nowhere. And he told me, basically, you got to move because you're not going to be able to live a normal life here. So a couple weeks later, I started touring Southern law schools because I had been to Myrtle Beach and I realized that I have no problems breathing in Myrtle Beach ever. Part of it is the coastal town. The sea air is really good. Salt air is really good for people with asthma. There are actually salt mines and salt caves that people go to who have breathing problems because it helps them. I also have one of those little salt lamps because that it might just be psychosomatic, but I feel like it helps a little bit. But anyway, so I ended up transferring to law school in North Carolina, giving up my full scholarship to law school, and guess what? Law schools don't offer scholarships to transfer students. So this stupid chronic illness cost me almost $100,000 in tuition that I hadn't planned on. But at that point, I was halfway through law school. I was literally number one in my class. I wasn't just going to drop out. But such is life. Shit happens. There's really nothing else you can say. But since I moved to North Carolina, I've been a lot better. Obviously, I don't have to wear a mask everywhere anymore, so people don't stare at me as much, which is kind of nice. I've been to the hospital twice since I've been down here for about a year. Once just because I got really sick and that triggered an exacerbation, and I ended up in the ICU the week before the MPRE, which is a professional responsibility exam that you have to take in most states as a law student. I still passed, but you know, it always happens at the worst time. And this spring, just when the weather started going crazy, going back and forth a lot, I did have an exacerbation, but I was only in the hospital for about a day and a half, I guess. But that's still a lot better than being in the ER every other week. And let me tell you, I've been to most of the hospitals in Maryland, so if you ever need advice on what's the best place to go, I can tell you. um, anyway, so that was the start of my long journey through multiple health problems that overlap and trigger each other, and it's just been a huge mess. But I think I'm finally in a place where I started to figure things out. And, you know, just I want to tell you that as someone who suddenly developed a whole bunch of chronic illnesses as an adult, you know, I'm still in law school. I managed to keep a job until I became a full-time day student. That made it hard. But it makes it really difficult because you can't always do the same type of work that you're used to. I used to work at Godiva in the mall, but I couldn't work there now because they keep it at a low temperature and the back is refrigerated. I would just have an attack every day because of the change in temperature that I would constantly be exposed to. So you don't think about these things until you have to. And one other thing that's related to it, I actually have a handicapped parking permit because especially when it's cold out, if I have to walk a long distance, I will have an attack. And it feels very strange because, you know, I don't have any problems with mobility, other than if the weather triggers me for some reason or if something else in the air is triggering me, suddenly I'll stop and I won't be able to go where I want to go. When I was going to school in Baltimore during the winter, it was almost impossible for me to make it back to my car at night. You know, I would literally have to sit in my car for about 5 minutes and start to breathe more normally again before I could even start to drive. And that's really scary. And I feel terrible having a handicap permit when I'm not visibly disabled. But, you know, it's something that you don't think about until you have to deal with it. Which is another thing I want to talk about is if you see someone parking in a disabled spot, they don't look disabled, don't say anything to them because you don't know what's going on, and chances are they have a disability of some sort. You know, maybe they can walk, maybe they just can't walk very far. Maybe it's something internal. You don't know what it is. You don't have to know what it is. It's not your right to know what's going on with people, and they might be sensitive about it, and bringing it up to them is gonna just wreck their day in that moment. It probably won't wreck their entire day because they're used to it, but just don't be that person. Just don't park in a parking space if you have a permit. If someone has a permit, they have a right to be there. The only people that should be bothering them about it is a police officer, because you have to have a little card in your wallet that they can see saying, yes, you are disabled and you're not just using the space. But people don't really, if it happens at all, it's very rare. It's like food stamp fraud. It's, I think, 99.1% not fraud, like 0.9% is fraud. And when people do exercise fraud with that, it's generally because they still don't have the money for other things they need, and they're kind of trading around with people who need the food because they need money for other things that they also can't afford. So there's no such thing as a welfare queen, by the way, but that's way besides the point. My point of this video was just, you know, even if you're healthy, things can happen. Don't ignore it. Research, because even if you're seeing a doctor, there's no guarantee that they're doing what they're supposed to do. I've seen a lot of bad doctors who gave me treatments that didn't make sense, who ignored my symptoms, and I ended up getting worse. Even though they're health professionals, you still have to check up on them, ask them questions. And my one doctor, the one that I was talking about earlier that gave me the bogus treatment, when I questioned one of them because the treatment said, do not take if you have asthma because there's a huge risk of death, I questioned him on that, and he's like, why are you questioning me? I'm the doctor, just do what I say. And that is the point when I stopped seeing him. Don't take crap like that from doctors. They're there to help you. It's a treatment relationship. They're not, it shouldn't be that paternalistic. So you really have to be your own advocate. I hear that all the time, and I hate it because it's so cliche and it's so annoying, because when you're sick, it's really hard to do that, and you shouldn't have to, but you do. So just keep that in mind. If you're starting to have any symptoms, get a second opinion if you don't think you're being treated properly. And don't ignore it, because it can get worse. You can end up in the hospital, and you know, it's scary, but a lot of chronic illnesses like that can kill you. Like, if I have a bad attack, I could die. And so you've really got to be on top of it, even if you're used to it. So if you have any questions about anything like that, please leave it in the comments, and I will get back to you. But otherwise, from here on out, I'm going to talk about some other health issues and, you know, managing the cost of healthcare and all that. So hopefully it won't be such a big gap between this video and the next video. My last final's in a couple of days, so I'll be on summer break. So hopefully I'll have a little more time to do that. So it's been great seeing you again. Bye.